Hello and welcome to uAdventure Analytic course. In this course, we will learn about learning analytics and how to implement them in uAdventure. But first, let's explain what are learning analytics. Game analytics means collecting and analyzing the user interactions in a game to get a better insight of the user's experience. This is very useful for designers and developers. In contrast, learning analytics collect users' interactions with educational purposes, which is useful for researchers and teachers. When we put them together, we get learning analytics for games, or game learning analytics. In uAdventure, learning analytics are built in, providing an automatic link of the game model with the analytics model. Some of the analytics in uAdventure are even ad hoc, with no configuration required. The uAdventure analytics are based in xAPI meaningful traces. For some interactions, ATL xAPI model is used, but mainly the xAPI for serious game profile is used. This profile includes vocabulary for accessing areas using items or characters, alternative selections, computable and variable changes. Here you can see an example of xAPI. The trace is composed of an actor, which is here, a verb, which is here, an object, and finally a result. This trace means that Dan has completed the level 1 winning in 2 minutes. In uAdventure, we provide a lot of analytics, many of them ad hoc, with no configuration required. These include accessing areas, interacting with elements, skipping cutscenes, and the location-based traces. Some other traces require minimum configuration, such as choice selection. Finally, completables provide a high-level control for the progress, and hence they require more configuration. However, the game itself is a completable, and to generate its start, progress and completion, once completables are configured, it requires no configurations at all. Starting with the ad hoc traces, a scene and cutscene traces trigger accessed traces, with the type of the scene and the ID. Here, in the documentation tab of the uAdventure scene, you can switch between the different xAPI types. When a scene is a cutscene, it can be skipped sometimes, and for these cases, a skip trace is automatically sent. For element interaction, both NPC and items actions generate interacted traces, including the action name as an extra information. For instance, all the interactions of this character are automatically traced, with no configuration at all. The different location-based actions also are traced. So, when the player moves in the world, enters, exits, or looks a point of interest, or a region, or follows directions, a trace is automatically generated. Some other traces require a minimum amount of configuration, such as the alternatives. Mainly, choices in dialogues are alternatives, and they require to be configured with an ID, and the correct answer needs to be indicated. Let's jump into uAdventure to see how we can configure an alternative. First, we create the conversation. In this conversation, we will create an option node. And for this option node, we specify the options. Let's say that this question ID is question, for example, and let's answer yes and no for the responses. And let's check the first option as correct. On the other hand, scenes can be alternatives too, using exits as choices. When the player successfully exits this scene, the choice is correct and incorrect otherwise. For instance, in this scene, we can change its type to alternative in the documentation and configure the different exits accordingly. Finally, completables allow to define the game progress. They do not impact the gameplay experience at all, but mean a lot in the analysis. To control a completable, the milestones are used to identify the start, end, and progress. Whenever a milestone is hit, an start, end, or progressed trace is sent. And also, completables include an score. There are several types of milestones, and the progress can be very configurable. So let's jump to uAdventure to see it in action. Let's create a completable that starts when the player enters the main scene. And ends when the player interacts with the cook. We can also determine its progress by identifying key milestones during the task, such as talking with the receptionist, and entering the library scene. Knowing the game state can be very useful for analysis. Hence, in uAdventure, variable changes that happen due to user actions are appended to the action trace. Lastly, the tracker, that is the piece that sends the traces to the analytics server, can be configured to be local or online, to have a backup and to format the traces either in xAPI or CSV. Let's play a little bit of this game and then jump to the traces to see them. And now we can check the traces log. Here you can find all your traces, such as initialized, progressed, interacted, selected, or completed. And with this concludes the uAdventure Analytics presentation. Have a nice day!